At this very moment, something extraordinary is happening. You believe you are listening to words, but what if I told you that the same consciousness speaking these words is the very consciousness reading them? What if the I that speaks and the I that listens are not two but one? This is not poetry, this is not metaphor, this is the hidden power that Jesus revealed when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And until you discover what that I truly is, you will search for power, truth, and life where they can never be found in the world of effects, rather than in the invisible cause. The great mistake of spiritual seeking, my dear friends, we must begin by acknowledging a mistake that has been made throughout centuries of spiritual seeking, a mistake so fundamental that it has kept humanity in bondage even while reading the most sacred scriptures. When Jesus spoke those profound words, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," the world made an assumption. It assumed he was speaking of Jesus of Nazareth, the man. It assumed he was claiming exclusive authority for his person, and in that assumption the hidden power was lost. But the mystic knows differently. The illumined soul understands that Jesus was not speaking of his human form, but of the I am that dwelt in him. The same I am that dwells in you, in me, in all of creation. He was revealing the secret of secrets, that the Christ, the I am, is universal, infinite, and indivisible. The nature of I am. Let us go deeper into meditation now. Close your eyes for a moment and silently declare, "I am." What have you said? Have you spoken of your body? No, the body cannot say I am. Have you spoken of your thoughts? No, thoughts come and go, but the I am remains. You have touched something eternal, something that was never born and can never die. This I am is not your personal possession. You cannot improve it, you cannot diminish it. It's simply I-S. And this is the great revelation. The I am that you are is the same I am. That was in Jesus, that was in Buddha, that is in every realized soul. There are not many I ams, there is only one, appearing as the many. The I am is not personal possession, but universal presence. When we claim I am, we are not speaking of our limited human self, but touching the infinite consciousness that animates all life. When we utter those two simple words I am, we stand at the threshold of the greatest mystery and the most practical truth ever revealed to humanity. Yet how casually we speak them throughout our day. I am tired. I am worried. I am struggling. In each utterance, we unwittingly claim something that is either profoundly true or dangerously false, depending upon what we believe that I to be. The human tendency is to personalize everything. We say my consciousness, my understanding, my spiritual development, as though consciousness were something we possess, like a garment we can put on or take off. This is the fundamental error that keeps us in bondage. We believe that the I am is personal to us, that it is something we own, something that is ours exclusively, something that can be improved upon or diminished by our actions. But the mystic discovers something entirely different in the deep silence of meditation. When all thought subsides, when the chattering mind becomes still, when even the sense of personal self begins to dissolve, what remains? There remains a pure awareness, a consciousness that simply I says. This consciousness does not belong to you, you appear in it. It is not your possession, you are its expression. It is not limited to your body or your thoughts. It is infinite, eternal, and indivisible. Consider the sun and its rays. Can a single ray of sunlight say, "I have my own light, separate from the sun"? No, the ray is simply the sun expressing itself in that particular direction. Remove the sun, and the ray ceases to exist. The ray has no independent reality apart from the sun. In precisely the same way, you have no independent reality apart from the infinite I Am. What you call I is simply universal presence expressing itself as the form you call your life. This is not poetry or pleasant philosophy meant to comfort us. This is the actual nature of existence, and when we realize it, everything changes. The moment you stop believing that I Am is your personal possession and recognize it as universal presence, temporarily focused as you, the burden of personal responsibility for all things lifts. You are no longer required to be the creator, the sustainer, the healer, the supplier. Those are the functions of I Am, the infinite consciousness that is actually living your life. Think of how the ocean and a wave relate. The wave rises from the ocean, moves across its surface, and returns to the ocean. Does the wave have an existence separate from the ocean? No, it is always and only the ocean, temporarily taking the form of a wave. The wave cannot say, I have my own water, my own power, my own life. Its water is ocean water, its power is ocean power, its life is ocean life. Yet while it appears as a wave, it can express the full nature of the ocean, its depth, its power, its life-giving properties. You are that wave. I Am is that ocean. When Jesus declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was not speaking as Jesus the wave, claiming superiority over other waves. He was speaking as one who had realized his wave nature was completely inseparable from the ocean nature. He had discovered that his I and the infinite I Am were not two things trying to become one, but one thing that had never been divided. This recognition transforms everything because suddenly you understand you are not a limited human being trying to reach an unlimited God. You are unlimited God appearing temporarily as a human being. The power you seek is not something you must acquire or develop. It is the very substance of your being, waiting only to be recognized and allowed to flow freely through your transparency. Truth is not intellectual belief but lived experience. The way, truth, and life are not concepts to be studied but spiritual realities to be realized in the silence of our being. Throughout the centuries, humanity has accumulated vast libraries of spiritual knowledge. We have scriptures, commentaries, interpretations, doctrines, and theological frameworks attempting to capture truth in words and concepts. Students spend lifetimes memorizing sacred texts, analyzing their meanings, debating their interpretations. Yet all of this intellectual activity, while perhaps valuable as preparation, remains in the realm of belief rather than realization. Truth, in its living essence, cannot be captured in words any more than you can capture sunlight in a box. When we speak of truth as lived experience rather than intellectual belief, we are pointing to something that can only be known through direct encounter. Consider how different it is to read about love in a book versus experiencing love in your heart. You can study every poem ever written about love, master every philosophical theory about its nature, yet remain completely ignorant of what love actually is until you experience it directly. The moment love floods your being, all the books become unnecessary. You know, not because you have been convinced by arguments, but because you have tasted the reality itself. This is precisely the relationship between spiritual concepts and spiritual realization. You can believe that God is omnipresent, you can memorize verses that declare it, you can argue eloquently in its defense, but until you have sat in deep silence and felt the actual presence permeating your being, filling the room, dissolving the boundaries between inner and outer, you have only a concept, not a realization. The concept lives in your mind, the realization transforms your entire existence. Jesus did not say study the way or believe in the truth or understand the life. He said, "I am these things." The statement is immediate, present tense, experiential. When he spoke those words, he was not reciting doctrine. He was bearing witness to what he was experiencing in that moment. The way was not a path he had read about. It was the living reality moving through him. The truth was not a belief system he had adopted. It was the eternal presence he consciously lived in. The life was not a theory about existence. It was the infinite vitality flowing as his very being. This distinction between intellectual belief and lived experience becomes crucial in practical spiritual living. When trouble comes, and it does come to everyone, intellectual belief offers little comfort. You can repeat affirmations, quote scriptures, remind yourself of what you believe, yet the fear remains, the pain persists, the problem looms large. Why? Because you are still operating in the realm of thought, and thought cannot overcome thought. One belief system battles another, one fear counters another hope, and you remain trapped in mental gymnastics. But when truth is lived experience, when you have actually touched the presence in meditation, when you have felt the reality of "I am" permeating your consciousness, then in moments of trouble you have somewhere to return. You do not return to a belief, you return to an experience. You become still, you move into that inner sanctuary where you once encountered the presence, and you wait, not hoping it might appear, but knowing it is already there, because you have been there before. This is not faith in a concept, this is confidence born of experience. The mystics of all ages have testified to this distinction. They speak not as theologians presenting arguments, but as witnesses reporting what they have seen, felt, and known. When Ramana Maharshi pointed seekers to the question, "Who am I?" he was not asking for an intellectual answer, he was inviting them into a direct experience of their own true nature. When the Quakers sit in silence, they are not thinking about God, they are waiting to experience the living presence. When the contemplative enters deep meditation, she is not reviewing her beliefs, she is opening herself to direct encounter with reality itself. This lived experience cannot be transmitted through words, yet it can be awakened through silence, through practice, through the dedication to go beyond thinking about truth into experiencing truth. The hidden power lies in recognition, not acquisition. We do not gain spiritual power, we awaken to the power that has always been present within us as our true nature. One of the most persistent illusions on the spiritual path is the belief that we are seeking something we do not have. We approach spirituality as beggars approaching a king, as empty vessels hoping to be filled, as powerless beings trying to gain power. We pray as though God were distant. We meditate as though we were trying to manufacture consciousness. We seek enlightenment as though it were a prize to be won through sufficient effort. This entire approach, though sincere and well-intentioned, rests upon a fundamental misunderstanding of our true nature. The hidden power lies not in acquisition but in recognition. You do not need to gain spiritual power because you already are spiritual power expressing itself in human form. You do not need to find God because God is the very consciousness with which you are searching. You do not need to become enlightened because your true nature has never been in darkness. The entire journey, then, is not about getting somewhere, but about awakening to where you already are. Imagine a prince raised by peasants, unaware of his royal heritage. He lives in poverty, struggles for survival, and dreams of one day becoming wealthy and important. Then one day a messenger arrives with proof of his true identity. In that moment of recognition, does the prince acquire royalty? No, he was royal all along. The recognition does not create his status, it simply reveals what has always been true. All that changes is his awareness of who he truly is. Yet this change in awareness transforms everything about how he lives. This is your situation exactly. You are not a powerless human being who might, through great effort and good fortune, someday acquire spiritual power. You are spiritual power itself, temporarily wearing the costume of human limitation, having forgotten your true identity. The power is not waiting somewhere in the future, contingent upon your worthiness or your effort. It is present now, in this very moment, as the consciousness reading these words, as the life beating your heart, as the intelligence organizing every cell in your body without your conscious direction. Why then do we not experience this power? Not because it is absent, but because we are looking in the wrong direction. We are seeking in the outer world what can only be found through inner recognition. We are trying to acquire through doing what can only be revealed through being. It is as though we were standing in bright sunlight, eyes closed, complaining about the darkness and praying for light to appear. The light is already present, we need only open our eyes. This recognition happens not through mental effort, but through a shift in awareness, through what might be called spiritual awakening or conscious realization. In meditation, when the mind becomes still and the constant chatter of thought subsides, there comes a moment, sometimes fleeting, sometimes sustained, when you simply know. You know not as an intellectual conclusion, but as a direct experience that the presence you have been seeking is the very presence you are. The power you have been praying for is the power that enables you to pray. The life you have been trying to find is the life that has been living you all along. This recognition, once experienced, can never be completely forgotten. Even when you return to ordinary consciousness, even when you again become caught up in the dramas and struggles of human existence, somewhere deep within you remember. You remember that beneath all appearance of limitation, beneath all sense of separation, there is an infinite power that is your true nature. And with each return to this recognition in meditation, with each moment of conscious awareness that I am is present here and now, this recognition deepens, stabilizes, and begins to transform your entire experience of life. The shift from seeking to recognizing is the shift from effort to grace, from struggle to surrender, from becoming to being. It marks the end of the spiritual search and the beginning of spiritual living. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. One of the most persistent illusions on the spiritual path is the belief that we are seeking something we do not have. We approach spirituality as beggars approaching a king, as empty vessels hoping to be filled, as powerless beings trying to gain power. We pray as though God were distant. We meditate as though we were trying to manufacture consciousness. We seek enlightenment as though it were a prize to be won through sufficient effort. This entire approach, though sincere and well-intentioned, rests upon a fundamental misunderstanding of our true nature. The hidden power lies not in acquisition but in recognition. You do not need to gain spiritual power because you already are spiritual power expressing itself in human form. You do not need to find God because God is the very consciousness with which you are searching. You do not need to become enlightened because your true nature has never been in darkness. The entire journey, then, is not about getting somewhere but about awakening to where you already are. Imagine a prince raised by peasants, unaware of his royal heritage. He lives in poverty, struggles for survival, and dreams of one day becoming wealthy and important. Then, one day a messenger arrives with proof of his true identity. In that moment of recognition, does the prince acquire? Royalty? No, he was royal all along. The recognition does not create his status, it simply reveals what has always been true. All that changes is his awareness of who he truly is, yet this change in awareness transforms everything about how he lives. This is your situation exactly. You are not a powerless human being who might, through great effort and good fortune, someday acquire spiritual power. You are spiritual power itself, temporarily wearing the costume of human limitation, having forgotten your true identity. The power is not waiting somewhere in the future, contingent upon your worthiness or your effort. It is present now, in this very moment, as the consciousness reading these words, as the life beating your heart, as the intelligence organizing every cell in your body without your conscious direction. Why then do we not experience this power? Not because it is absent, but because we are looking in the wrong direction. We are seeking in the outer world what can only be found through inner recognition. We are trying to acquire through doing what can only be revealed through being. It is as though we were standing in bright sunlight, eyes closed, complaining about the darkness and praying for light to appear. The light is already present. We need only open our eyes. This recognition happens not through mental effort, but through a shift in awareness, through what might be called spiritual awakening or conscious realization. In meditation, when the mind becomes still and the constant chatter of thought subsides, there comes a moment, sometimes fleeting, sometimes sustained, when you simply know. You know not as an intellectual conclusion, but as a direct experience that the presence you have been seeking is the very presence you are. The power you have been praying for is the power that enables you to pray. The life you have been trying to find is the life that has been living you all along. This recognition, once experienced, can never be completely forgotten. Even when you return to ordinary consciousness, even when you again become caught up in the dramas and struggles of human existence, somewhere deep within you remember. You remember that beneath all appearance of limitation, beneath all sense of separation, there is an infinite power that is your true nature. And with each return to this recognition in meditation, with each moment of conscious awareness that I am is present here and now, this recognition deepens, stabilizes, and begins to transform your entire experience of life. The shift from seeking to recognizing is the shift from effort to grace, from struggle to surrender, from becoming to being. It marks the end of the spiritual search and the beginning of spiritual living. Separation is the only illusion we must transcend. When we understand there is no you and God, but only one infinite I am expressing, we discover the hidden power. If we were to identify the single illusion that causes all human suffering, all sense of lack, all experience of fear and limitation, it would be this: the belief in separation. This is not merely one illusion among many, it is the root illusion from which all others spring. When we believe ourselves to be separate from God, separate from each other, separate from the infinite source of all good, we condemn ourselves to a life of struggle, seeking, and inevitable disappointment. Yet this separation, which seems so real and so absolute, has no actual existence. It is the grand illusion, the cosmic misunderstanding, the veil that must be lifted before the hidden power can be revealed. Consider how completely this illusion dominates human experience. We speak of my life and God's life as though there were two lives. We pray to God as though God was somewhere else, listening from a distance. We seek guidance as though wisdom were external to us. We pursue supply as though abundance existed outside our own consciousness. In every moment, in countless subtle ways, we reinforce the belief that we are here and God is there, that we are separate entities trying to establish connection with the divine. But what if this entire framework is false? What if there has never been even one moment of actual separation? What if what we call you and what we call God are not two things at all, but simply two names for the one infinite consciousness expressing itself in apparently individual forms? This is not pantheism, which says everything is God. This is the mystical realization that there is only God, appearing as everything, and that your individual sense of I is simply the infinite I am experiencing itself from one particular focal point. When Jesus declared I and the Father are one, he was not describing a special achievement unique to himself. He was revealing the actual nature of all existence. He had awakened from the dream of separation into the recognition of unity. He no longer experienced himself as Jesus trying to reach God, but as God expressing as Jesus. The separation that had seemed so real dissolved in the light of recognition, and he discovered that he had never been separate for even one instant. The hidden power inside, I am the way, the truth, and the life, was never really hidden at all. It has been shouting its presence in every heartbeat, declaring itself in every breath, revealing itself in every moment of awareness. We simply were not listening. We were too busy seeking what we already possessed, too occupied with becoming what we already are, too distracted by the world of effects to recognize the infinite cause dwelling as our very consciousness. You have learned today that the I Am is not your personal possession, but universal presence, the one infinite consciousness appearing as all that exists. You have discovered that truth is not intellectual belief, but lived experience, something to be tasted in the silence of your being, not merely studied in the activity of your mind. You have recognized that the hidden power lies not in acquisition, but in recognition, the simple awakening to what has always been true. You have understood that separation is the only illusion you must transcend, the fundamental misunderstanding that creates all sense of lack, fear, and limitation. And you have seen that living from this consciousness transforms every moment, making spirituality not a Sunday practice, but the very foundation of practical daily living. But knowing these truths intellectually accomplishes nothing. The question now is, what will you do with what you have heard? Will you file this away as interesting philosophy, or will you begin today, this very moment, to live from this consciousness? I invite you to make a commitment, not to me, but to your own awakening. Beginning now, practice the presence of I Am. When you wake in the morning, before your feet touch the floor, pause and recognize, I Am is awake in me as me. As you go about your day, when challenges arise, when decisions must be made, when fear whispers its lies, stop and remember, I Am is the only power and presence here. Do not make this a burden, another spiritual task to accomplish. Make it a homecoming, a return to your true nature, a resting in what already is. You are not trying to become spiritual, you are recognizing the spirituality that has never left you. You are not trying to gain power, you are awakening to the power that is already living your life. And here is what I promise you, not as hope or speculation, but as testimony from one who has walked this path. As you live from this consciousness, as you make I Am your dwelling place rather than the shifting sands of human opinion and circumstance, you will discover a peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. You will find the doors open before you without struggle, that supply flows to you without anxiety, that wisdom speaks through you without effort, that healing manifests around you without technique. This is not because you have become special or earned divine favor. It is simply because you have stopped blocking the natural flow of infinite good with the belief in separation and limitation. You have stepped aside from your own imagined self and allowed I am to live as you, to think as you, to act as you, to be you. Remember, you are not a human being having occasional spiritual experiences. You are infinite spirit having a temporary human experience. You are not a wave trying to reach the ocean. You are the ocean appearing as a wave. You are not a ray of light seeking the sun. You are the sun expressing itself as a ray. Jesus revealed this truth 2,000 years ago. The mystics of every tradition have confirmed it throughout the ages. And now it has been presented to you, not as ancient history, but as present reality. The same I am that spoke through Jesus speaks through you. The same truth that illumined the Buddha illumines your consciousness. The same life that animated all the saints and sages is the life beating your heart in this very moment. Do not wait for a more convenient time to begin living from this truth. Do not postpone your awakening until you feel more worthy or more prepared. The time is now. This moment is your moment. This breath is your opportunity. Go forth from this place not as you came, as a seeker looking for truth, but as truth itself made manifest in human form. Go forth not trying to demonstrate God, but allowing God to demonstrate as you. Go forth not hoping for the kingdom of heaven to come, but knowing it is already established within you as your true nature. And whenever you forget, and you will forget, for the habit of human thinking is strong, simply pause, breathe, and remember, I am is the way. Not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not when you become more spiritual. Now, here, always. In deepest silence, with profound reverence, I am is present where you are, not as something separate from you, but as the very consciousness with which you understand these words. That which you seek, you already are. That which you hope to become, you have always been. That which you long to experience is experiencing itself as you in this eternal now. Be still and know. The hidden power is no longer hidden. It stands revealed as your own true self. Amen. And so it is. Imagine for a moment that everything you've ever criticized in another person was actually a mirror held up to your own consciousness. Every harsh word, every silent condemnation, every they should know better was really you, struggling with something unresolved within yourself. What if Jesus wasn't giving us a moral rule when he said, "Judge not"? What if he was revealing the secret to inner freedom? My friends, we come together today not to add another burden to your shoulders, but to lift one off, a burden so heavy, so exhausting, that most of us don't even realize we're carrying it. It's the burden of judgment. When Jesus spoke those transformative words, "Judge not," he wasn't delivering a commandment in the traditional sense. He was revealing a spiritual principle, a law of consciousness as exact as any law of physics. He was showing us the pathway to our own liberation, the nature of judgment. What is judgment, really? It's the human mind believing it has the wisdom to evaluate, condemn, or approve of another's spiritual journey. It's the ego presuming to know what God alone can know. Every time we judge another person, we're essentially saying, "I know better than the divine intelligence that created this being." But here's the mystical truth that sets us free. When you judge another, you're not really seeing them at all. You're seeing your own state of consciousness projected outward. The critical thought you have about your neighbor, that's your consciousness speaking about itself. The condemnation you feel towards someone's choices, that's revealing what's unreconciled within you. This is why Jesus connected judgment so directly to our own experience. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. This isn't punishment, it's spiritual law. The consciousness that condemns outside must experience condemnation within. The mind that criticizes others lives in a state of self-criticism. The illusion of separation, we judge because we believe in separation. We see ourselves as distinct, separate entities with the right and ability to evaluate other separate entities. But this is the grand illusion. In spiritual reality, there is only one life, one consciousness, one divine presence expressing itself infinitely. When you understand this, really understand it in your innermost being, judgment becomes impossible. How can the ocean judge one of its waves? How can the sun condemn one of its rays? You are that inseparable from every being you encounter. The practice of spiritual discernment. Now, some will say, but surely we must discern right from wrong. We must have standards. Yes, but discernment and judgment are entirely different faculties. Discernment is wisdom, judgment is condemnation. Discernment says, this action brings harmony, that one brings discord. Judgment says, this person is wrong, bad, or less than. Jesus himself demonstrated this perfectly. He discerned the consciousness of those he met. He saw through human appearances to spiritual reality, but he never condemned the person. Neither do I condemn thee, he told the woman caught in adultery. He was demonstrating a consciousness so elevated that it could witness human failings without judging the individual. Your divine assignment, here's your spiritual assignment, and it's the most liberating work you'll ever do. Begin to catch yourself in the act of judgment. Not to condemn yourself for judging, that would just be more judgment, but simply to notice. Ah, there's a judgment. And in that moment of awareness, ask yourself, what is this judgment revealing about my own consciousness? When you find yourself critical of someone's materialism, ask yourself where you are still attached to material things or afraid of not having enough. When you judge someone's anger, inquire into your own unexpressed anger. This isn't psychotherapy, this is spiritual alchemy. You're transmuting the lead of judgment into the gold of self-awareness. Living in the sacred now, as you practice this release from judgment, something miraculous happens. You begin to live in what I call the sacred now, a state of consciousness where you meet each person fresh, without the overlay of past conditioning, without the projection of your opinions and beliefs. In this state, you can actually see people. Not your idea of them, not your story about them, but their true spiritual nature. This is seeing through the Christ consciousness, and it changes everything. Where you once saw a difficult person, you now see a divine being having a human experience. Where you once saw failure, you now see a soul learning and growing. The freedom that awaits, my dear friends, when you truly stop judging others, you'll discover something wonderful. You've stopped judging yourself. The inner critic falls silent. The constant measuring and evaluating ceases. In its place comes a peace that truly does pass understanding. This is the promise Jesus held out to us. Not as a distant reward, but as a present reality available the moment we shift our consciousness. When we stand before another human being and pass judgment upon them, we believe we are seeing them clearly, objectively, as they truly are. We think our criticism is accurate, our assessment is fair, our condemnation is justified. But this is one of the great illusions of human consciousness. In truth, when you judge another person, you are not seeing them at all. You are seeing yourself. Every judgment you make is a mirror held up to your own consciousness. The faults you so readily identify in others are the very qualities that live, often unexamined, within your own mind. The behaviors that trigger your harshest criticism are frequently the shadows you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. When you declare someone else to be arrogant, dishonest, or selfish, you are confessing what occupies your own mental and emotional landscape. This is not a matter of psychology or personal opinion. This is spiritual law. Consciousness cannot perceive what it does not contain. You cannot recognize a quality in another unless that quality exists somewhere within your own awareness. The thief sees theft everywhere. The liar suspects everyone of lying. The jealous person imagines jealousy in every relationship they observe. Consider how this operates in your daily life. You meet someone, and within moments you have catalogued their flaws, their weaknesses, their failures. You have judged their appearance, their manner of speaking, their choices, their character. And you feel certain that your assessment is objective, that you are simply seeing reality as it is. But what you are actually doing is projecting the contents of your own consciousness onto them. You are using them as a screen upon which to display your own fears, insecurities, and unresolved conflicts. The tragedy is that the person you judge may walk away completely unaffected by your silent condemnation, while you must carry the weight of that judgment indefinitely. It becomes part of your mental atmosphere, your emotional climate, the very air you breathe. You have imprisoned yourself with your own thoughts, built walls with your own criticisms, created separation with your own condemnations. The mirror of judgment always reflects back upon the one who holds it, and what it shows us is not the other person's reality, but our own consciousness staring back at us. The greatest spiritual truth that Jesus demonstrated throughout his ministry was this: he saw divinity where others saw only humanity. He perceived the Christ presence where others perceived only sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, and outcasts. This was not naive optimism or willful blindness to human error. This was spiritual vision, the ability to look beyond the temporary manifestation of human behavior to the eternal reality of divine being that exists in every soul. When we operate from ordinary human consciousness, we see only appearances. We see the mistakes people make, the limitations they exhibit, the darkness they seem to carry. We become fixated on their past actions, their current struggles, their apparent failures, and in seeing only this surface reality, we miss the profound truth that lies beneath. Every person, regardless of their behavior or circumstances, is an expression of the infinite divine consciousness. The Christ dwells within them just as surely as it dwells within the saint. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of spiritual awakening learning, to see past the human drama to the divine reality. It requires a complete transformation of perception. You must train yourself to look at the alcoholic and see the Christ temporarily obscured by addiction. You must look at the angry person and recognize the divine presence momentarily clouded by pain. You must look at the one who has harmed you and acknowledge the God-self that exists beneath their unconscious behavior. This doesn't mean you condone harmful actions or pretend that destructive behavior is acceptable. It means you develop the capacity to hold two truths simultaneously. Yes, this person is acting from unconsciousness, and yes, the divine presence still resides within them. Yes, their behavior may be unacceptable, and yes, their essential nature remains untouched by their actions. Yes, they may need correction or consequences, and yes, they are still worthy of recognition as spiritual beings. When you develop this Christ vision, something extraordinary happens. You stop reacting to people from fear, anger, or superiority. You begin responding from a deeper place of understanding and compassion. You can still maintain boundaries, still protect yourself, still speak truth to error. But you do so without that poisonous energy of condemnation that judgment always carries. You see the person as they truly are in spiritual reality, even while acknowledging where they currently stand in human experience. The human mind is constantly busy with the exhausting work of evaluation. From morning until night we assess, criticize, approve, and condemn. We judge the driver who cuts us off, the co-worker who speaks too loudly, the politician whose views differ from ours, the family member who disappoints us. We carry these judgments like heavy stones in an invisible bag, accumulating more weight with each passing hour, each passing day, each passing year. What we fail to recognize is that every judgment we hold is a chain that binds us. Every criticism we maintain is a lock on our own prison cell. We think we are merely observing reality, expressing valid opinions, or protecting ourselves from harm. But in truth, we are creating our own captivity. The mind that constantly judges is never at peace. It cannot rest. It cannot be still. It is forever scanning, evaluating, finding fault, and building cases against the world and everyone in it. True spiritual freedom begins the moment you release your need to judge. Not because someone has commanded you to stop, not because it's the morally correct thing to do, but because you finally recognize that judgment serves no purpose except to keep you imprisoned in a state of separation and conflict. When you let go of the compulsion to evaluate everyone and everything around you, a space opens within your consciousness, a vast, peaceful space where love can enter, where understanding can flourish, where compassion can flow freely. This liberation doesn't happen through force or willpower. You cannot judge yourself into not judging. The freedom comes through recognition, through seeing clearly that the judging mind is the suffering mind. Every time you release a judgment, you feel lighter. Every time you choose not to condemn, you breathe more easily. Every time you look at another human being without mentally cataloging their faults, you experience a moment of genuine peace. And here is the beautiful paradox. The less you judge others, the less you judge yourself. The compassion you extend outward inevitably flows inward. The mercy you offer to another becomes the mercy you receive. The freedom you grant to others by releasing your judgments of them becomes your own freedom. You discover that you were never really judging them at all. You were judging life itself, and in doing so, judging your own existence. When judgment falls away, what remains is the natural state of your being, open, free, at peace, and capable of genuine love. At the deepest level of reality, there is no separation between you and any other living being. This is not poetry or metaphor. This is the fundamental truth of existence. We are all waves in the same ocean, rays of the same sun, expressions of the same infinite consciousness. What appears as separate individuals, each with distinct personalities, histories, and destinies, is really the one divine presence manifesting in countless forms. When you truly grasp this truth, judgment becomes impossible, for how can you condemn another without condemning yourself? Yet judgment thrives on the illusion of separation. It requires us to believe that we are fundamentally different from those we judge, that we are over here and they are over there, that we are good and they are bad, that we are enlightened and they are ignorant, that we are worthy and they are not. Every judgment we make reinforces this false sense of division. It builds invisible walls between ourselves and others, creating a world of isolation where everyone stands alone, separate, competing for worth and value. This separation is perhaps the greatest source of human suffering. When you judge another, you cut yourself off from the flow of divine love that seeks to move through you. You cannot simultaneously condemn someone and remain connected to the universal consciousness that embraces all. You cannot hold yourself apart in superiority and experience the joy of unity. You cannot build walls of judgment and expect to feel the freedom of boundless connection. The spiritual journey is really a journey from separation back to unity, from the illusion of division back to the recognition of oneness. Every time you judge another person, you take a step backward into isolation. Every time you release judgment and recognize the divine presence in another, you take a step forward into the truth of your being. You remember that their struggles are your struggles, their pain is your pain, their awakening is your awakening. You are not separate observers of each other's lives. You are participants in the same eternal dance of consciousness discovering itself. When this recognition deepens in you, compassion arises naturally, not as something you must force yourself to feel, but as the inevitable response to seeing truly. How can you be harsh with another when you recognize they are you in a different form? How can you condemn when you understand that their unconsciousness is the same unconsciousness that has at times clouded your own awareness? The illusion of separation dissolves, and what remains is the simple, profound truth: we are one. The judgments we carry are rarely about the present moment. They are accumulated residue from the past old grievances, remembered slights, catalogued failures, and stored disappointments. When you judge someone today, you are almost never seeing them as they actually are in this moment. You are seeing them through the lens of yesterday, last week, last year, or even decades ago. You are relating to a memory, not to a living, breathing, evolving human being who stands before you now. This is one of the most tragic aspects of judgment. It freezes people in time. It takes someone's worst moment and declares it to be their eternal identity. It takes a mistake they made years ago and insists that this mistake defines who they are today. The person may have grown, changed, learned, and transformed, but your judgment refuses to acknowledge this possibility. You hold them captive to their past, and in doing so, you hold yourself captive as well, unable to experience the freshness and possibility of the present moment. True spiritual awakening requires that we meet each person fresh, as if for the first time, without the heavy baggage of previous assessments. This doesn't mean we forget everything or ignore patterns of behavior. It means we remain open to the possibility that this moment is new, that consciousness is always evolving, that transformation is always possible. When you approach someone without dragging along your accumulated judgments, you create space for a genuine encounter. You allow them to be who they are now, not who they were then. Living in the now means releasing the need to maintain your catalogue of other people's faults. It means letting go of the stories you've constructed about who they are and what they're capable of. It means meeting this moment with open eyes and an open heart, willing to be surprised, willing to be wrong about your previous conclusions, willing to see something you've never seen before. This is where freedom and judgment cannot coexist. Judgment keeps you locked in the past, endlessly reviewing and reinforcing old conclusions. Present moment awareness dissolves judgment naturally because you're too busy experiencing what is to worry about what was. When you're fully present, you discover that the person before you is as new as this breath, as fresh as this moment, as full of possibility as the unfolding now. The past loses its grip, judgment falls away, and you find yourself capable of relating to others with a clarity and compassion you never thought possible. My dear friends, we have journeyed together through one of the most transformative teachings ever given to humanity. We have explored how judgment imprisons us, how the Christ presence lives in all beings, how freedom comes through releasing our need to condemn, how separation is illusion, and how the present moment dissolves the chains of past assessments. But now you must ask yourself, what will you do with this understanding? Will. These words remain mere concepts, pleasant ideas to consider and then forget. Or will you allow them to penetrate your consciousness so deeply that they transform the way you see every person you encounter? The teaching is simple, but the practice requires vigilance. It requires awareness. It requires a willingness to catch yourself in the very moment judgment arises and choose differently. You will not become perfect at this overnight. You will stumble, you will judge, you will forget. But each time you remember, each time you choose to see the Christ instead of the error, each time you release condemnation and embrace recognition of divine presence, you take one more step into freedom. Remember this, the world does not need your judgment. It has plenty of that already. What the world desperately needs is your vision, your ability to see past appearances to reality, to recognize the divine spark even in the darkest places, to offer the gift of non-condemnation that creates space for transformation. When you stop judging others, you don't become passive or weak. You become powerful with the power of love. You become clear with the clarity of truth. You become free with the freedom that only comes from releasing the need to evaluate, condemn, and separate yourself from your fellow human beings. So I leave you with this: begin today. Begin now. Begin with the very next person you encounter. Look at them not with the eyes of judgment, but with the vision of Christ. See them not as their mistakes, but as their divine essence. Meet them not with your accumulated opinions, but with the freshness of present moment awareness. And as you do this, as you practice this daily, hourly, moment by moment, you will discover that you are not just changing how you see others. You are transforming your entire consciousness. You are awakening to who you truly are. You are living the teaching that Jesus gave us: judge not. This is your path. This is your calling. This is your freedom. Go now, in peace, and see with new eyes.
Now, let us begin. There comes a moment in every spiritual life when the familiar ground beneath our feet gives way, and we find ourselves standing upon an entirely different foundation than the one we had trusted before. And it was such a moment, quiet, unannounced, without thunder or lightning, that changed the entire course of my life and became the beginning of what you now call the infinite way. I did not arrive at it through years of study, nor through any superior discipline of the mind. It was given in a way that defies explanation, and yet its truth has proven itself over and over again in every corner of human experience. And the revelation was simply this: you never had a problem? Not that your problems were solved, not that they were diminished, not that they were made easier to bear, but that in the light of spiritual reality, they had never existed as powers, as forces, as actualities. You see, the world is forever teaching us to examine, to analyze, to resist, and to wrestle with appearances, and because of this, we come to believe that a problem is something outside ourselves, pressing upon us, demanding our energy, our strength, our ingenuity. But the truth that came in that sacred moment revealed a very different picture. It showed that what we have been calling problems are nothing more than shadows cast by a false belief, a belief in a power apart from God, a presence that is not the presence. And the moment that belief is dissolved in the recognition of one power, one presence, one life, the shadow disappears, for it never had substance of its own. I would like you, as we begin this time together, to let this truth rest gently upon your consciousness. Do not try to grasp it with the intellect, For the intellect will immediately protest, will demand explanations and proofs and logical demonstrations. Do not engage it on that level. Simply listen, quietly, as though you were listening to a breeze moving across the surface of still water. Let it be an impartation. For the revelation that you never had a problem is not something to be reasoned out. It is something to be perceived inwardly, spiritually, silently. And if you will allow it, even now, something within you will begin to respond not to my words, but to the presence that stands behind the words, the presence that has no opposite. You may have come today burdened, perhaps with fear for the body, concern over supply, anxiety about time, or unrest over world events. These are the universal pressures that beset every individual born into the belief of material existence. But before we go one step further, let me assure you, the moment this truth dawns in you, the moment you sense even faintly that God is the only power operating in your life, something begins to loosen, to soften, to fall away. Not because you have overcome a problem, but because you have recognized that there is no power opposing the infinite. And this simple, profound recognition is the beginning of all healing, all peace, all freedom. So let us go forward gently, reverently, with the awareness that we are not here to acquire something, nor to add something to ourselves, nor even to improve our human condition. We are here to awaken to what already is, what has always been, what will forever be, the unopposed, uninterrupted, ever-present activity of God as the very essence of our being. And when this is seen, truly seen, you will know as I came to know. You never had a problem. Let us look now, quietly and honestly, at what we call the human condition. For unless we understand what the world believes, we cannot perceive why the revelation "you never had a problem" is so transforming. When we speak of problems, we are not speaking of anything abstract or distant. We are speaking of the very storms that sweep through human life. Illness in the body, lack in the purse, pressure in the schedule, and the restless turbulence of world events. These are the experiences that seem to rise like waves and throw us off our center, and it is because humanity has accepted these waves as powers that the sense of fear persists. You see, the human mind is forever declaring its allegiance to what I call the four temporal kingdoms: the kingdom of the body, the kingdom of supply, the kingdom of time, and the kingdom of external forces. Each one claims dominion. Each one whispers its threats. Each one demands that you bow before it. And because the world has believed in these kingdoms for centuries, humanity has come to accept them as ultimate reality. When the body aches or falters, the world tells you that you are at the mercy of matter, that you are flesh and blood subject to decay, to laws that operate independently of God. When supply appears limited, the world insists that your security lies in bank accounts, in salaries, in opportunities that can be given or taken away by human hands. When time presses, the world convinces you that you are caught in a relentless march of hours and days, lacking the very substance you need to live your life. And when nations tremble, when headlines scream, when forces larger than yourself seem to shake the foundations of the earth, the world persuades you that you are a small being in a vast, uncontrollable universe. And because this is the universal belief, humanity suffers not from actual powers, but from the acceptance of these appearances as powers. Now listen carefully. This is the very atmosphere into which the spiritual message must come. This is the storm in which the Christ light must be recognized. The infinite way does not begin in peaceful gardens. It begins in the midst of the world's turbulence, in the very heart of the human turmoil. For it is precisely there that the false sense of power reveals itself, and precisely there that the presence within you declares itself as the only reality. When you feel fear in your body, or anxiety over your finances, or the weight of time, or dread over world conditions, it is not because there is an actual power acting upon you. It is because the mind has accepted a secondary power, a second presence, a rival to God. And it is this belief, and only this belief, that produces the storm. But remember this, the storm is never the truth. It is never the reality. It is an appearance, a shadow, cast by the belief in two powers. And when you turn from the appearance, even for a moment, and acknowledge within yourself that God is the only presence and the only power, the shadow begins to thin, to weaken, to dissolve. Not because you have fought it, not because you have resisted it, but because it cannot stand in the light of recognition. You may feel that your particular storm is unique, that others may find peace, but your situation is somehow different. Yet I tell you lovingly, gently, firmly, there is no storm that has authority over the one who abides in the secret place of the Most High. There is no condition that can impose itself upon the one who has awakened to the principle of oneness. And it is this principle, this eternal truth, that begins to dawn in us when we understand the nature of the human condition and the unreality of the powers it claims. So we look upon these storms not with fear, not with resistance, not with desperate prayer, but with the quiet assurance that whatever has a beginning in human belief must have an ending in spiritual realization. And in that assurance, we begin to glimpse the light behind the clouds. We begin to sense that the one who walks through the storms of the world is untouched by them. We begin to hear, perhaps faintly at first, the whisper of the inner voice saying, "Be not afraid, it is I." And from this recognition, the journey begins. And now, having looked at the storms that human experience brings, let us turn to a moment in my own journey that became the gateway to the revelation we are exploring together. For spiritual truth, as you know, rarely breaks upon us in times of ease. It comes when every human refuge has been exhausted, when even our most cherished methods no longer function, when the mind reaches a point of helplessness. And it was precisely in such a moment that the infinite way found its birth. For many years I had been serving as a practitioner, receiving calls from morning until night from the ill, the fearful, the lonely, the troubled. They came seeking help. And the remarkable thing was that help often came, healings occurred, discord dissolved, harmony appeared. Yet even in the midst of this activity, there was a gnawing question, a subtle dissatisfaction. Why do the same problems return? Why does the individual who has been healed of disease now return with lack? Why does the one delivered from fear now appear with resentment or guilt? What is it that keeps the wheel of human suffering in motion? You see, I had come to a point where the repetition itself was speaking louder than the individual cases. It was as if life were saying, "You are not yet touching the principle. You are still dealing with effects." And there arose within me a deep, nearly overwhelming weariness, not a physical weariness, but a spiritual hunger that no amount of successful demonstration could satisfy. For I began to sense that as long as one is working with conditions, one is still on the surface of life, still moving pieces upon a board without touching the invisible cause behind them. There came a day when the calls felt heavier than ever, not because of their number, but because I could no longer bear the illusion that anything external needed healing. I could no longer believe that supply or health or relationship or circumstance had any inherent power to disturb or to restore. And yet, lacking the principle that explained this, I found myself in a kind of inner darkness, a silence in which all my old methods failed me. The prayers I had known were empty. The affirmations were lifeless. Even the scripture felt flat, as though the Spirit had withdrawn its light. Now, understand this. Such a moment is not a punishment, not a sign of failure, but a sacred threshold. When the mind reaches its limit, when all personal effort is spent, when the human sense of self stands stripped of its tools and formulas, then only then does one become receptive to the impartation of the Spirit. And so it was in that quiet desperation, in that profound helplessness, that a spontaneous prayer arose from the depths of my being. It was not a prayer of words. It was not even a prayer addressed to God as something apart. It was a simple, silent yearning. Father, show me the principle. Show me what stands behind healing, behind harmony, behind all true activity. And in that moment of surrender, a stillness came, not the stillness of fatigue, but the stillness that precedes revelation. I knew nothing, yet I felt everything. I expected nothing, yet something within me recognized that the answer was already present. There was no struggle, no pleading, no mental reaching. There was only a vast, open receptivity. And into that receptivity, the light began to dawn. I did not know it then, but I had been brought to the threshold of truth by the very crisis I sought to avoid. Human insufficiency had become the doorway to spiritual vision. The failure of personal effort had prepared the mind to receive that which cannot be given through thought. And it was there, in that inner emptiness, that the revelation would come not as a thought to be remembered, but as a living presence to be known. We come now to that moment, and now we come to that sacred moment, the moment when the veil thinned and the truth that had been seeking me broke through, not with fanfare, not with excitement, but with the quiet certainty of something eternally present, waiting only to be recognized. I had laid down every tool, every method, every attempt to bring about a healing. I had released even the desire to know how truth works. And into that silence, into that emptiness, into that great yielding, the revelation came not as words, not as a teaching, but as an inner certainty so clear that no argument of the world could ever again shake it. The revelation was simply this: there is no problem. That which you have been trying to heal, to correct, to solve, does not exist as an entity, as a condition, as a power. It exists only as a belief in something other than God, in a presence apart from the presence, in a force that stands outside the one. And the instant this was seen, deeply and wholly, the entire structure of human fear collapsed. For if God is infinite, if God is all, if God is the only presence and the only power, then there is no place where a second power can stand. There is no room for disease. There is no room for lack. There is no room for fear. They are appearances, nothing more. It was as though I had been standing in a darkened room, attempting to push the darkness out through the window, trying desperately to sweep it away, only to discover that the moment a light is lit, the darkness cannot remain, not because it has been defeated, but because it never had substance. Darkness is not a thing. It is the absence of something. So too with every human problem. They are not things to be solved. They are the absence of the realization of one power. In that moment, I understood why the problems returned, why the healings were temporary, why the same fears reappeared in new forms. I had been attempting to deal with shadows, and when one shadow is removed, another can appear, so long as we continue to believe that shadows possess form or force. But once you see that the shadow has no life, apart from the light that casts it. You cease to deal with shadows altogether. You turn toward the light, and the light in this case is the living realization of God as the only presence, the only power, the only life, the only substance, the only cause. Once this is seen, even faintly, the so-called problem dissolves, not through effort, but through the simple impossibility of standing where it has no foundation. You are not overcoming anything. You are not resisting anything. You are not changing anything. You are merely recognizing what already is, that nothing exists that can oppose the infinite. This revelation did not come as an intellectual conclusion. It was not the result of reasoning. It was an impartation, a direct knowing from within. And with it came the immediate understanding that all spiritual healing rests upon this one principle: there is only God. Everything that appears as a problem, a condition, a discord, is merely the belief that something else has power. And the moment that belief is surrendered, the appearance fades. Now, I want you to hear this gently. The problem you face today, whatever its name, whatever its form, whatever fear it evokes, has no power. It has no law to support it. It has no life to sustain it. It has no substance to uphold it. It is a shadow, an appearance, a suggestion. And the instant you turn from the appearance to the one, the instant you acknowledge within yourself that God alone is the problem, begins to dissolve in the light of your recognition. This is the revelation that changed everything. This is the foundation of the infinite way. And this is the truth that begins to set you free, not by solving your problems, but by revealing that they were never real to begin with. And now, let us look more deeply at the principle that stood revealed in that sacred moment. For without understanding this principle, spiritual healing remains a mystery, a hope, a possibility, but never a certainty. But once the principle is known, truly known, healing becomes as natural as the rising of the sun. Not because you perform it, but because you align yourself with the nature of reality. The principle is this: there is one power, one presence, one life, one substance, and beside this one there is none other. Now, this may seem like a familiar statement, for nearly all spiritual traditions affirm the oneness of God, but I tell you, few truly understand what it means to proclaim that God is one. For if God is one, and if God is all, then there cannot be God in disease. There cannot be God in lack. There cannot be God in fear. There cannot be God and a human mind with power to oppose the infinite. There cannot be two powers. In fact, the moment you entertain two powers, you step out of spiritual reality and into the realm of illusion. You see, every problem in human experience rests upon this one false belief. The belief that something other than God has presence, has activity, has law, has substance. And this belief is universal. It is the atmosphere of the world. It is the hypnotism that envelops mankind. But it is only a belief, no more than a dream that claims substance until the dreamer awakens. When the revelation came that you never had a problem, it was not saying that the appearance does not exist on the human level. The shadow on the wall exists as a shadow. The storm exists as a storm. But they do not exist as powers. They do not exist as causes. They do not exist as realities that can oppose the one. The entire weight of their seeming force is born from the acceptance of a second presence, from believing that there is something other than God that can influence your life. Now, listen carefully. The healing comes not when the body changes, not when the supply appears, not when the circumstance resolves. The healing comes when consciousness recognizes that only God is, and that recognition removes the belief in a second power. And when the belief is gone, the appearance has no foothold in your experience. It must dissolve, for its only life was the belief you held about it. This is why spiritual healing is not an act performed by a practitioner. It is not the application of truth to a condition. It is not the manipulation of invisible forces. Healing occurs when the practitioner rests in the realization of one presence, one power, one life, one law, and in that atmosphere of realized oneness, the false sense of discord cannot persist. Let me put it another way. If God fills all space, where is there room for anything unlike God? If God is the life of your being, what power can endanger that life? If God is your substance, what can diminish your supply? If God is the law of your existence, what external circumstance can legislate against that law? If God is your consciousness, what thought can separate you from your source? When you begin to see this not as a statement of faith, not as a creed, but as a living perception, you will understand why Joel Goldsmith never healed a disease, never lifted a burden, never corrected a condition. He recognized that no such thing existed in the presence of the One. And it was this recognition, this pure awareness of God as all that dissolved the appearance of error in the lives of those who called for help. So take this into your heart. One power is all you need to know. The moment your consciousness embraces the truth of one, the moment it yields even slightly to the allness of God, the appearance of two begins to fade. And with it, the belief in the problem fades as well. You are not overcoming, you are not resisting, you are not solving, you are recognizing. And in that recognition lies the entire secret of spiritual healing, spiritual peace, and spiritual freedom. Now, having touched the principle itself, let us come down gently into the landscape of daily living, for unless a spiritual truth can be lived, it remains only a beautiful idea, soaring perhaps, but without roots in experience. And yet, the marvel of this revelation is that it applies just as fully to the smallest detail of your day as it does to the great turning points of your spiritual journey. For the one that is God is not sometimes present and sometimes absent. The one does not appear in holy moments only to withdraw when the ordinary tasks of living arise. No, the same presence that dissolves fear in meditation walks with you as you prepare a meal, as you answer the telephone, as you sit quietly in a room alone. And it is in these ordinary moments that the realization of one power begins to take form in your practical, lived experience. Let us look, then, at the four temporal kingdoms, again, not as forces that bind you, but as opportunities to practice the awareness of the One. When the body signals discomfort, the world shouts, "This is power, this is law, this is reality." Yet, in the light of the principle, you pause. You do not fight the sensation. You do not run for remedies in fear. You do not declare affirmations in desperation. You simply remember, there cannot be God and this. And quietly, without struggle, you rest in the recognition that the life which animates the body is perfect, spiritual, untouched. And in that resting, something shifts not in the body first, but in consciousness. And because consciousness is the cause, the body follows. Then supply, a bill arrives, a job changes, an unexpected expense appears. Instantly the world insists, see, you are dependent on external sources. You are at the mercy of circumstances, but you know now that supply is not money, not employment, not opportunity. Supply is the activity of God expressing itself as your life. So you turn inward, not to ask, not to plead, but to acknowledge there is only God, and God is my sufficiency in all things. And then you go about your day without fear, without hurry, without mental calculation. And in that atmosphere, the outer supply arranges itself not by your manipulation, but by the law of harmony inherent in the one. Consider time. How many are enslaved by the clock, rushed, pressured, overwhelmed? Yet time is only a concept useful on the human level, but powerless over the spiritual being. When you feel hurried, you pause, even for a single breath, to remember that the eternal is your life, that the now is infinite, spacious, complete. And in that remembrance, time bends, tasks unfold smoothly. What seemed impossible becomes effortless, not because you have mastered time, but because you have stepped out of the belief that it masters you. And then the great kingdom of external forces, world events, political upheaval, economic turbulence, these seem to roar like mighty winds, demanding your fear, your reaction, your allegiance. But the moment you recognize that these forces are but shadows on the screen of collective belief, the moment you see that the one power remains untouched by human activity, you are freed, not detached, not indifferent, but centered, able to behold the world without being of it. Now, understand this. These applications are not techniques. They are not methods. They are the natural expression of the consciousness that knows one power only. And because this consciousness is your true identity, every opportunity to practice becomes an invitation not to fix your life, but to reveal its spiritual foundation. This is how the realization works in daily life, not by changing the outer world, but by revealing that the outer world never possessed the authority you imagined. As you rest more frequently in the awareness of the one, you find that problems lose their urgency. Events no longer dictate your peace. Circumstances no longer govern your inner state. You become, in the quietest and most natural way, transparent to the presence, and through that transparency, harmony appears as your experience. And so I say to you, begin gently. When the appearance arises, whether in body, supply, time, or world, do not rush to correct it. Pause, turn within, acknowledge the one, and let the realization dawn that there is nothing in all the universe that can oppose the infinite. This alone is the beginning of freedom. And now we come to the practice, not a practice in the human sense of techniques and exercises, but the practice that arises naturally when one begins to perceive the allness of God and the nothingness of appearances. For if the revelation is true, and it is, then the entire spiritual life consists not in doing, not in striving, not in shaping conditions according to desire, but in resting, listening, and recognizing. These three movements form the heart of the infinite way, and when understood, they open the door to the very presence that dissolves every appearance of discord. Let us take them one by one. First, resting. This resting is not physical relaxation, though that may accompany it. It is not the stillness of inactivity or the passivity that waits for external change. This resting is the inner posture of yielding every attempt to solve, to manipulate, to fix, to control. It is the profound recognition that I can of mine own self do nothing. And in that recognition, the mind loosens its grip on the problem, the emotions soften their tension, and the sense of personal responsibility dissolves. Resting means surrendering the belief that your welfare depends on human thought or human effort. It is the willingness to allow God to be God. Then, listening. This is the central act of spiritual life, and yet it is not listening for a voice, nor for instructions, nor for guidance in the usual sense. It is listening for the presence itself, the silent, living activity of God within your own being. This listening begins when thought grows quiet, when words cease, when all mental formulation is set aside. You do not come with petitions. You do not come with desires. You come empty, receptive, open, and in this emptiness, the inner ear awakens the capacity to perceive impressions that are not born of the human mind, but of the spirit. This listening, you see, is the prayer of the infinite way, for true prayer is not speaking to God, but allowing God to speak within you. And finally, recognizing. For after the resting, after the listening, there comes a moment often so gentle you might overlook it, when the truth reveals itself. It may come as a quiet certainty, a subtle warmth, a sense of release, or simply an awareness that peace is present. And in that awareness, you recognize something, that God has always been here, that the presence has never departed, that the one power has never been threatened. In that instant, whether brief or long, whether dramatic or understated, the illusion of the problem is pierced, and the appearance begins to fall away, not through your effort, but through the recognition of truth. Now I would have you understand that this practice is not reserved for times of crisis. It is meant to be woven into the entire fabric of your day, brief pauses, moments of turning inward, times of quiet acknowledgement. You may stop for a single breath and simply say within yourself, "Thou art here," or "I and the Father are one," or no words at all, only the stillness that listens. In these small intervals, repeated many times, the consciousness becomes attuned, the inner senses sharpen, and the presence that seemed distant becomes the living atmosphere of your being. Do not imagine that you must achieve some special state. Do not imagine that long meditation is the pathway. No. Joel Goldsmith taught and lived the truth that frequent inner turning, short and sincere, brings far more realization than rare extended practices. It is the constancy, the sincerity, the returning again and again that opens consciousness to the infinite. And so, when the appearance of discord arises, you do not rush, you do not fear, you do not attempt to make truth do something. You simply rest, you listen, you recognize. And in that quiet recognition, you discover that God has already gone before you, that harmony is already established, that the solution is not forthcoming, it is present. This is the practice. This is the way. And if you will walk gently in this manner, you will find that the presence becomes a living reality, not only in meditation, but in the midst of your daily tasks. And the more it becomes real, the less the world's appearances can disturb your peace. You begin to live from the center. You begin to live by grace. And so, as this practice becomes a way of life, this resting, this listening, this quiet recognition, something within you begins to change. Not suddenly, perhaps, not with fireworks or dramatic signs, but with the steady surety of dawn spreading across the horizon. For the transformation we speak of is not an improvement of the human self, not a refinement of personality, not the development of spiritual powers. It is the gradual dissolving of the false sense of self, the vanishing of the belief that you are a being separate from God, striving to reach God. And in its place there emerges a new awareness, a new center of identity, a new way of seeing one that knows itself to be the transparency for the presence, the instrument through which the infinite expresses itself. When this begins to unfold, problems no longer present themselves as emergencies, events lose their capacity to shake you, circumstances lose their authority. You may still witness the forms of discord appearing around you. This world is full of appearances, but they do not enter you. They do not claim your belief. They do not govern the inner atmosphere of your being. For you have discovered that your peace does not depend upon what the world does or does not do. It depends only upon your recognition of the One. You will notice, as this transformation deepens, that your reactions soften. Where once you might have hurried, you now feel no haste. Where once you might have feared, a quiet confidence arises in its place. Where once you might have condemned, compassion now flows effortlessly. You do not try to be better. You do not strain to be spiritual. These qualities unfold naturally because they are not attributes of a human person. They are the nature of the presence living itself as you. And as this unfolds, you begin to sense a subtle, ongoing guidance, not a voice in the sense of human language, but a movement of intuition, a direct knowing that reveals itself at the exact moment it is needed. You may find that you are moved to go somewhere, to speak a word, to refrain from speaking, to act or not to act, not through planning, but through the effortless appearing of right action. This is the inner leading, the still small voice, the activity of God within your consciousness. And as you learn to trust it, you discover that life becomes harmonized, coordinated, organized by a wisdom far beyond your own. There will also be moments, perhaps many, when the old fears return, when the mind once again rushes to judge or to worry or to react. And in these moments, you do not condemn yourself, for condemnation belongs to the belief in two powers. Instead, you simply return to the practice, resting, listening, recognizing. You turn inward even for a breath and acknowledge that all power is in the invisible, not in the appearance. And each return deepens the transformation. You see, the goal is not to eliminate appearances, nor to perfect the human scene. The goal is to live from the center, from the conscious awareness of the One. And when you do, the world around you begins to reflect that inner harmony, not because you have changed it, but because you have withdrawn your belief in the forces that once seemed to rule it. You come to understand what Jesus meant when he said, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth." For the peace you experience now is not the result of conditions aligning themselves. It is the peace that comes from knowing that the presence is your life, your supply, your protection, your guide, and that nothing can separate you from the activity of God being itself as you. In this transformation, you cease trying to demonstrate truth, and truth begins to demonstrate itself. You stop trying to bring harmony into the world, and harmony begins appearing wherever you are. You stop trying to heal, and healing begins happening around you, not because you have done anything, but because you have become transparent to the One who is doing everything. This is what it means to live as one who knows not intellectually, not as theory, but as experience. You walk through the world quietly, gently, peacefully, carrying an atmosphere that others can feel, even if they cannot name it. Your presence lifts. Your silence blesses. Your being radiates the light of the Christ, not as a power you exert, but as the natural expression of who you are. This is the transformation. This is the fruit of the revelation. This is the life lived under grace. And now, as we come to the close of this time together, let us rest for a moment in the spirit of what has been revealed. For teachings, words, and explanations have their place, but it is the impartation behind them, the presence, that has been quietly moving in and through our consciousness, that is the true substance of this message. And if you have listened, not merely with the mind, but with that inner faculty that feels truth when it is spoken, then something in you has already begun to awaken, already begun to loosen its hold on the belief in two powers, already begun to sense that divine freedom which has always been your inheritance. Let me leave you with this gentle assurance. The revelation that came to me that you never had a problem was not given for me alone. It was not a private gift or a personal illumination. It was a universal truth, a principle as available to you as the air you breathe. And if you will allow it, if you will sit quietly with it, ponder it, or simply let it pass through your awareness like sunlight through a window, it will begin to work within you. It will begin to soften the hard edges of fear. It will begin to dissolve the urgency of worry. It will begin to reveal the unreality of every appearance that has claimed authority over you. You need not grasp it all at once. You need not become a master of it tomorrow. The infinite way is not a path of hurry, nor is it a path of struggle. It is a path of awakening, of unfolding, of gentle remembrance. And every step you take toward the realization of one power is supported by the very presence you seek. You are not walking alone. You are not striving to reach God. You are awakening to the truth that God has always been where you are. So as you go forward from this moment, carry with you not the weight of a teaching, but the simplicity of a single truth. There is only God. And whenever the appearance of a problem arises, in whatever form, you need not wrestle with it. You need not fear it. You need only turn inward, even for a breath, and acknowledge the presence of one power. Let that recognition be your refuge. Let that awareness be your practice. Let that truth be the ground upon which you stand. And if you will do this softly, sincerely, without strain, there will come a day, perhaps sooner than you imagine, when you too will discover that the problem you struggled with was never there. It was a shadow, a suggestion, a passing belief. And the moment the light of truth shone upon it, it dissolved into the nothingness from which it came. This is the invitation. This is the promise. This is the freedom that awaits you. Go now in the peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. Rest in the assurance of God's presence. Walk gently in the awareness of one power, and let the light of the Christ, which is your own true being, shine forth through you as blessing, as harmony, as peace. Thank you for this sacred time together.